The world has always whispered of men who carried death as easily as a sword, men who moved through life as shadows, leaving nothing but silence and ruin in their wake. Tonight, we step into that shadow, into the forgotten corridors of blood-soaked history, to meet the ones they never dared to speak of openly. The deadliest warriors who ever lived, each a storm in human form, each a master of destruction, each a reflection of the darkness that men can wield when they strip away morality and embrace only survival and power. Our journey begins in the frozen steppes of Mongolia. The wind here does not merely bite, it sculpts the bones of men into instruments of war. Here a boy was raised on the screams of rival clans, taught that mercy is weakness and obedience only a tool for the stronger. By the time he was 10, he could ride faster than a deer, strike harder than any man his age dared imagine, and understand that fear is the first weapon of a warrior. This boy would grow to become a general, whose name alone made kingdoms tremble, Genghis Khan, not a man who merely conquered, but a force of nature. His arrows fell like rain, his cavalry moved like shadows, and entire cities vanished from the earth, leaving only scorched ground and the smell of burning flesh. He taught his soldiers not to fight for glory, but for the inevitability of death itself, and in this he became death incarnate. But to call him merely a conqueror is to misunderstand the magnitude of his terror. He was an architect of annihilation, a strategist who calculated the destruction of millions with the precision of a master chess player. And yet, in the midst of this devastation, there was a terrifying elegance, an artistry of killing that left historians baffled. Cities did not fight, they surrendered. Families did not flee, they vanished. And through it all, Genghis Khan moved like a phantom, omnipresent yet untouchable, orchestrating the perfect symphony of violence. When we speak of deadliest warriors, we are not speaking of morality or justice. We speak of efficiency, of lethal artistry, of men who wielded death as if it were their birthright. And as we trace these shadows across time, one chilling truth becomes clear. Power, when coupled with skill and unflinching cruelty, creates men who are not merely warriors. They become legends written in blood. Far from the frozen steppes in the humid, mist-cloaked mountains of Japan, another figure carved his name into the annals of death, silent, precise, and merciless. Here steel was not merely metal, it was an extension of the body, a language spoken through movement and intent. This was the world of the samurai, where honour and blood intertwined, but among them one man transcended tradition, becoming less a soldier and more a living weapon. Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi did not rely on numbers, he did not command armies, he relied on himself, and that singular reliance made him more dangerous than entire regiments. From adolescence, he tested every blade, every combat style, every tactic against the fiercest opponents. He fought duels where the air itself seemed to crack under tension, where the slightest twitch could mean death. By the end of his life, he had claimed over 60 victories in one-on-one combat. 60 lives ended by a single mind and hand, all executed with the fluid precision of a storm, unrelenting yet elegant. But his deadliness extended beyond his skill with a sword. He was a psychologist of death, a reader of human fear, intent, and hesitation. Opponents often fell not to the steel itself, but to the silence, the calculated patience, the way he made them commit the first mistake. He understood that killing is as much mental as it is physical. Musashi taught that to master the body, one must first master the mind, and those who underestimated this principle became nothing more than lessons etched in his legacy. In the quiet of Japan's mountains, he would wander, leaving behind only tales whispered in village huts and the memory of men who had looked into his eyes and felt the inevitability of death. He embraced solitude, not out of humility, but as a weapon. Every encounter sharpened him, every enemy honed his instincts, And when he finally laid down his blade, the world had already been altered, its stories forever haunted by a man who moved like smoke and struck like lightning. The samurai code spoke of honor, loyalty, and courage, but Musashi redefined these ideals. To him, honor meant mastery, courage meant standing unflinching before death, and loyalty was to the art of killing itself. In the quiet contemplation of his later years, writing treatises on strategy, he revealed the terrifying truth. The deadliest warriors are not merely forged in battle, they are sculpted in thought, in patience, in the discipline to see death as a canvas and life as a fleeting, fragile prelude. As we traverse the tapestry of history, one truth becomes undeniable. While armies can crumble, cities can fall, and empires can vanish, a true warrior leaves a mark that no time can erase. Musashi's mark was not only the men he felled, but the very philosophy of combat he perfected, an enduring shadow that still whispers in the wind over Japan's misty peaks. Across deserts scorched by sun and rivers dark with conquest, another figure emerged, born not into privilege, not into a gilded court, but into chains. He was a Mamluk, a slave trained from boyhood to become the ultimate instrument of war. In his veins ran discipline, colder than ice and fury hotter than the desert sands. He would not simply fight, he would annihilate, leaving behind only terror and obedience. His name is largely lost to history, but his deeds echo through the blood-soaked chronicles of the Crusades. These warriors were taken as children, their identities erased, their loyalty forged in absolute control. They were taught to kill without hesitation, to strike without fear, and to dominate without question. Some became generals, others the secret hands of vengeance, but all were the apex predators of their time. One Mamluk in particular carved a path that even kings could not escape. In the streets of Damascus, he would cut down knights and nobles alike, turning every confrontation into a theatre of death. Sword met armour, horse met man, and by the time the dust settled, his enemies were nothing more than whispers on the wind. What made him truly deadly was not brute force alone, it was the art of psychological warfare. He understood fear as a weapon, patience as a weapon, the unpredictability of sudden violence as a weapon. Entire cities fell before him, not because of armies, but because they had seen the shadow of the Mamluk approach. Tales tell of families hiding in cellars, only to be hunted with merciless efficiency. His legacy was one of terror meticulously executed, a dark poetry written in the language of blades. Yet beyond the carnage, there was a method, an intelligence that defied the chaos of war. He strategized like a master, anticipating every move, exploiting every weakness. He turned the battlefield into a stage, and he, the puppeteer of death, to face him was to confront inevitability itself. Few survived, fewer remembered, and even fewer understood the depth of his genius. The deadliest warriors of history are often defined by numbers, by the volume of their victories. But the Mamluks remind us that true lethality lies in precision, in control, and in the silent, inexorable assertion of dominance. He was not just a soldier, he was a phenomenon, a force that reshaped the fate of empires. In the echoes of his sword, in the tremble of the surviving witnesses, we glimpse the raw, unflinching power of men who exist beyond morality, beyond mercy, beyond the pale of ordinary fear. Far to the west, along the blood-stained roads of ancient Rome, another warrior rose, a man whose name still sends chills through historians, Spartacus. Unlike the disciplined Mamluk or the solitary Musashi, Spartacus was forged in chains and oppression, moulded by cruelty into a weapon of rebellion. A gladiator, bred for the arena, trained to kill not for honour, but for survival and the amusement of the powerful. Every strike he delivered in the sand was a lesson in death. Every fall he survived. A rehearsal for vengeance. Spartacus was not merely a fighter, He was a leader of the oppressed, a strategist who turned desperation into audacity. His rebellion was not spontaneous, it was meticulous. With nothing but stolen swords and sheer will, he led thousands of slaves against the most organized military force of the known world. Rome, confident in its legions, was unprepared for the ferocity of a man who had learned to turn pain into power. In the chaos of battle, Spartacus moved like a shadow, striking where fear was weakest, exploiting hesitation, and transforming every disadvantage into opportunity. But what made him truly deadly was more than skill with weapons. He understood men, their fears, their desires, their limits. He wielded this understanding like a blade sharper than any sword. Entire cohorts of Roman soldiers fell to his cunning, not merely his strength. He inspired loyalty with fire, intimidation with resolve, and terror with the certainty that anyone who faced him could not escape unscathed. Spartacus's story is a grim reminder of the duality of human nature. A man enslaved and humiliated can, when pressed by injustice, become the embodiment of lethal resistance. Unlike kings who command armies or samurai who duel in controlled arenas, Spartacus's lethality was raw, adaptive, and fueled by righteous fury. He transformed oppression into a weapon more deadly than steel, more dangerous than armies. He turned survival into art, rebellion into carnage. Even in defeat, the legacy of Spartacus haunted the empire. The streets where he marched ran red with blood, not just of soldiers, but of fear itself. His rebellion became myth, his methods studied in secret by generals who would never face him, and his name whispered among those who dreamed of overturning the order of the powerful. To study the deadliest warriors is to confront the terrifying truth. Lethality is born not only from training or talent, but from the alchemy of suffering, rage, and cunning. Spartacus teaches us that a man with nothing to lose can become unstoppable, a living storm of calculated violence. And in the annals of history, he is the echo that reminds us: oppression can forge monsters, and monsters can reshape the world. Across the jagged cliffs and icy fjords of Scandinavia, another warrior was forged, not in chains, not in disciplined schools, but in the crucible of relentless survival. He was a Viking, a raider whose name was etched in fear and legend, Ragnar Lothbrok. Unlike the structured genius of Musashi or the disciplined terror of a Mamluk, Ragnar thrived in chaos, commanding not armies of thousands, but bands of men whose loyalty was earned in battle and blood. He understood the land, the sea, and the psyche of his enemies. Every raid was not random, it was a calculated strike, a symphony of terror performed with axes, fire, and psychological warfare. Ragnar's deadliness lay in his unpredictability. Cities slept under the illusion of safety, only to awaken to the screams of a storm they could not see coming. He used fear as a weapon, sowing panic before a sword was even drawn. Survivors would tell tales of a man who seemed everywhere at once, his presence on the battlefield both impossible to predict and impossible to escape. He moved like the wind, struck like lightning, and vanished like mist, leaving nothing but ruin in his wake. But there was more to Ragnar than mere brutality. He was a strategist, a manipulator, a visionary who understood that true power comes not only from victory, but from control. He exploited rivalries, turned allies into enemies, and used deception as a blade sharper than any steel. The Viking raids he orchestrated were not simple acts of pillage. They were psychological campaigns designed to destabilize kingdoms, break morale, and leave lasting terror in the hearts of those who survived. Ragnar Lothbrok embodied the apex predator mentality of a warrior who understood one immutable truth: survival and dominance are inseparable from fear. To fight him was to confront chaos incarnate, a man who could predict your hesitation, exploit your weakness, and leave you questioning your very perception of reality. Every village burned, Every battlefield crossed, every enemy defeated added layers to the myth, cementing his name as one of the deadliest warriors history has ever witnessed. In Ragnar's legend, we see the terrifying elegance of instinct combined with cunning, chaos blended with strategy. Unlike Genghis Khan, who conquered empires, or Spartacus, who led the oppressed, Ragnar's lethality was personal, intimate, and absolute. He demonstrated that a warrior's deadliness is measured not only by the enemies he kills, but by the fear he inspires, the uncertainty he sows, and the stories that survive him to haunt generations. From the storm-lashed fjords of the north, we travel to the deserts and marble halls of the ancient world, to a man whose very name became a nightmare, whispered in palaces and barracks alike, Alexander the Great. Unlike the solitary precision of Musashi, the disciplined terror of a Mamluk, or the primal fury of Ragnar, Alexander's deadliness was a fusion of genius, charisma, and unrelenting ambition. He did not merely fight battles, he orchestrated them with the mind of a god and the heart of a predator. By the age of 20, he commanded one of the most disciplined armies in history. By 30, he had carved an empire stretching from Greece to India. But it was not just his speed, strategy, or swordsmanship that made him lethal. It was the psychological grip he held over every soldier, every enemy general, every city-state that crossed his path. He understood fear, loyalty, and ambition, not as abstract concepts, but as weapons. One glance, one command, and men would charge into slaughter with the certainty that to hesitate was to die. Alexander's genius lay in his orchestration of death itself. At Gaugamela, his tactics tore Persian formations apart like paper. At Issus, he exploited terrain, morale, and psychology to annihilate forces many times his own size. Entire nations bent, not because they were weak, but because his vision of conquest was irresistible and inevitable. He transformed war into a theatre of dominance, each maneuver a calculated stroke in the art of killing on a monumental scale. Yet behind the glory and the blood-soaked triumphs lay a deeper, darker truth. Alexander's brilliance was inseparable from ruthlessness. Cities that resisted were razed. Leaders who defied him were executed in ways designed to terrorize others. His ambition was infinite, his compassion rare, his appetite for control absolute. In his hands, death became both instrument and art form, a legacy written not in ink, but in the screams of the fallen and the trembling obedience of the living. And so, as we step back from the shadows of these 6 warriors, a pattern emerges. Deadliness is not merely strength or skill. It is mastery of fear. It is the fusion of mind and body, strategy and instinct. It is the willingness to embrace chaos, to wield suffering as a tool, and to exist beyond the moral constraints that bind ordinary men. The deadliest warriors who ever lived remind us of the raw, unflinching potential of human nature. Terrifying, majestic, unstoppable. They are mirrors of power unbound, shadows that stretch across time, and echoes that still haunt the pulse of history. And as we leave their stories behind, one chilling thought lingers. True mastery is measured not by the lives we save, but by the inevitability of the destruction we can unleash.